This billionaire has everything: money, power, secrets. But what happens when a journalist uncovers the one scandal that could destroy it all? As lines blur between ambition and forbidden love, will she risk it all to expose him, or to save him? Get ready for betrayal, redemption, and a romance that could cost them everything. And trust me, the ending, you won't see it coming. I'm your host, Josh, and it's an absolute pleasure to share this story with you. The newsroom was buzzing, the chaotic hum of ringing phones and clacking keyboards filling the air as Lily Morgan scanned her inbox. A mountain of leads, but none with enough spark to truly set her career on fire. Until tonight, that is. She glanced down at her coffee-stained notepad, catching sight of one scrawled name circled twice: Jasper Blackwood. The man was a mystery, known as much for his absence in the media as he was for his influence. Whispers about the elusive billionaire floated through high society and corporate circles alike, but no one had ever peeled back the curtain to reveal the real man. He was an enigma, and tonight, it seemed, she might be holding the key to unraveling him. It had all started with a cryptic phone call. "Blackwood's got skeletons in the closet, and you're the only one who can find them," the voice on the other end had said, smooth but firm, as if they'd rehearsed the line 100 times. "I can't give you more than that. Do your homework, Morgan." Then the line had gone dead, and here she was, staring at a slim folder on her desk, its contents teasing her with vague hints and shreds of intrigue. There were pages upon pages of Jasper Blackwood's corporate dealings, several seemingly impeccable investments, and records of charitable donations, all immaculate, of course, as if scrubbed clean of any wrongdoing. Too clean, even for a man as meticulous as Blackwood. The man had risen to power almost overnight, moving from a relatively unknown figure to a powerhouse at the helm of an empire that seemed to have fingers in every profitable pie imaginable. But how? And more importantly, why did he shun every form of publicity, refusing interviews and turning down every request for a photograph? The more she read, the deeper her curiosity grew, the flame of ambition flaring inside her. This was the story she'd been waiting for. Lily could see it all unfolding in her mind. The headline that would make waves, her own byline beneath it. The buzz, the recognition, the satisfaction of finally cracking something no one else had dared to touch. But first, she needed more. She took a sip of her now cold coffee, rolling her chair back to grab her coat. If she was going to get answers, she'd have to do more than just stare at her notes. She needed to see Blackwood up close. An invitation-only charity gala was taking place tonight, a rare event where New York's elite would gather, and Jasper Blackwood was rumored to be attending. If she could catch him there, maybe she'd see something that the corporate profiles and polished public statements didn't show. The ballroom at the Grand Hollow Hotel shimmered with a kind of manufactured magic, every crystal chandelier and polished surface reflecting the wealth of its attendees. Lily felt a wave of nerves as she stepped into the crowded room, wondering if she was in over her head. She'd gotten her hands on a last-minute press pass, a minor miracle in itself, but even that wouldn't shield her if Blackwood caught on to her true purpose. Her gaze swept the room, trying to blend in with the crowd of New York's glitterati, who looked as though they'd stepped straight out of a glossy magazine. And then, as if he could sense her attention, she spotted him. He was standing near the bar, casually yet elegantly dressed, an air of quiet authority surrounding him. Jasper Blackwood was taller than she expected, his dark hair perfectly groomed, his suit tailored to perfection. His posture was relaxed, almost indifferent to the grandeur around him, but his sharp gaze revealed someone who missed nothing. He looked every bit the untouchable billionaire, a fortress of secrets disguised as charm and charisma. Taking a deep breath, Lily crossed the room, feeling her heart hammer as she drew closer. But before she could even reach him, he turned. His dark eyes, piercing and guarded, fixed on her with a look that seemed to strip away every pretense she'd worn as armor. "Press pass?" he asked, his voice smooth, barely louder than a whisper, but with a hint of something challenging. Lily cleared her throat, trying to maintain her composure. "Lily Morgan, the Tribune," she replied, keeping her tone steady. "I was hoping you'd be willing to answer a few questions, Mr. Blackwood." His lips curled into a faint, amused smile. "Journalist. Figures," he murmured. He gave her a once-over, but his expression remained inscrutable. "Tell me, Miss Morgan, do you often ambush people in their own world?" Her pulse quickened, but she refused to back down. Only when I think it's worth the effort, she replied smoothly, matching his gaze. And you, Mr. Blackwood, seem like someone worth knowing. Is that so? His smile deepened, a hint of mystery in his gaze that made her breath hitch. He took a step closer, his presence filling her senses. I've been told I'm not the best company for someone looking for a story, but you know that already, don't you? Lily forced herself to keep her gaze steady. Every story has two sides, Mr. Blackwood, and I'm here to hear yours. For a moment, he studied her, and she felt as if he were looking right through her, peeling back layers she didn't even know she had. Then, with a slight nod, he motioned toward the quieter side of the room. Very well, Miss Morgan. I suppose I can spare a few minutes of my time. As they stepped into a more private alcove, she found herself alone with him, the hum of the party fading into the background. Jasper's gaze didn't waver, and there was something almost predatory in his stillness, as if he were assessing her worth. So, what is it you want to know? He asked, his tone almost bored, though his eyes sparkled with a subtle, dangerous curiosity. Lily's mind raced, formulating questions that would crack his facade. But in his presence, her carefully prepared approach wavered, and she found herself asking, "Why have you made such an effort to keep out of the spotlight? Most people with your status would be courting it." His eyebrow arched, and a wry smile played on his lips. "Do you assume that wealth requires validation? Not necessarily, but it does seem like you're hiding something." At that, his eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "Everyone has secrets, Miss Morgan. Even journalists, I'd imagine." She held his gaze, feeling a dangerous thrill as the tension between them thickened. Jasper's voice dropped to a near whisper, almost as if he were sharing a secret. "Trust me, you may not like what you find in mine." A shiver ran down her spine, but she pushed it aside, refusing to be intimidated. She was in too deep to back out now. "I'll take that risk," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. Jasper leaned back, considering her with an almost approving gleam in his eyes. "Bold, Miss Morgan. I'll give you that." He paused, letting the silence linger before he added, "But don't say I didn't warn you." The elevator doors opened, and Lily stepped out into the polished elegance of Blackwood Tower, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and anticipation. She had tried all weekend to make sense of her encounter with Jasper at the gala. There was something about him, an energy, a presence, that left her both unnerved and intrigued. And that look in his eyes, like he was sizing her up for a secret she didn't even know she held. She'd spent hours obsessing over the puzzle he presented, going back and forth between her instinct to pursue the story and the strange, unexpected pull he seemed to have over her. Jasper Blackwood was a powerful man, yes, but she hadn't expected him to be so captivating. Today, she'd arranged an interview under the guise of a feature on Blackwood Enterprises. Ethan, her editor, had been more than pleased. "Make him talk, and we'll make the story," he'd said, his voice crackling with excitement over the phone. Little did he know, Lily planned to make this feature more than just a profile. She wanted the truth, unvarnished and unscripted. As she crossed the vast lobby, her heels echoing against the marble floor, Lily felt her confidence waver. But she straightened her shoulders, reminding herself why she was here. Jasper's world was meticulously controlled, shrouded in secrets that hinted at something darker, and she was ready to uncover whatever lay beneath. "Miss Morgan, welcome," a voice chimed as she reached the reception desk. A sharply dressed woman with a poised smile greeted her. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting you." Her pulse jumped. She nodded politely, following the woman's lead as she was escorted through a series of glass-paneled hallways. The grandeur and scale of Blackwood Enterprises were impressive, even intimidating, but she didn't let it throw her off. After all, if anyone knew how to keep their composure under pressure, it was her. The woman led her into a spacious office filled with light, a wall of windows providing a breathtaking view of the city below. And there he was, Jasper Blackwood, standing behind his massive mahogany desk, his gaze fixed on the cityscape as if he were a king surveying his domain. He turned at the sound of her entrance, his expression unreadable, but his eyes lit with a flicker of recognition and something that looked like amusement. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice like silk. "I wasn't expecting you to follow up quite so soon." She smiled, keeping her tone light but her resolve firm. "You left me intrigued, Mr. Blackwood." A rare feat. He stepped around the desk, crossing the room with a confidence that seemed almost effortless. Intrigue is a double-edged sword, you know. Careful. It cuts both ways. Lily tilted her head, meeting his gaze head-on. Then I suppose I'd better watch myself. Jasper's expression softened just slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. So, you're here for a profile piece. That's what you told my assistant, isn't it? Every good story starts with a profile, she replied. Though I think we both know this one could go beyond your average business article. For a moment, Jasper simply watched her, and Lily felt a prickling awareness that he was trying to read her in a way few people did. Finally, he nodded, gesturing to the leather armchair across from his desk. Very well, let's see if we can make this interview interesting. Please, sit. She took a seat, pulling her notepad from her bag as Jasper leaned back in his chair, his fingers laced in front of him. Ask away, Miss Morgan. She paused, catching the hint of a challenge in his eyes. Let's start simple. What drove you to start Blackwood Enterprises? Jasper raised an eyebrow, as if the question was surprisingly mundane. Ambition, he replied smoothly. An idea, a vision, whatever you want to call it. I saw a space, and I filled it. Wealth followed. But it wasn't just about wealth, was it? She leaned in, sensing an opening. If that's all you were after, you could have stepped into the spotlight like everyone else. But you stayed hidden. Why? His gaze darkened, but a hint of a smile played at his lips. Some things are more satisfying when they're kept in the shadows, Miss Morgan. Don't you agree? A shiver ran through her, though she refused to show it. Perhaps. But the public loves a hero as much as they love a mystery. And right now, you're a mystery. One with plenty of rumors attached. He laughed softly, the sound both warm and cold, and she couldn't tell if he was amused or irritated. Rumors are just that. Rumors. Then why not dispel them? She countered. Unless, of course, you enjoy keeping everyone guessing. Jasper leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Maybe I do. Maybe the mystery is the only thing keeping certain people away. Ever thought of that? Lily held his gaze, the intensity in his eyes almost too much to bear. This was no ordinary interview, she realized. This was a game, a battle of wits that she wasn't entirely sure she would win. So you're saying you stay hidden because it's safer? She pressed, her curiosity now fully piqued. His lips twitched in a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Let's just say, Miss Morgan, that trust is not something I grant lightly. Trust requires time, commitment, and most people aren't willing to put in the work. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that he was speaking directly to her, as though inviting her into something far deeper than she'd expected. I suppose that makes me different then, she said, her voice soft but firm. Jasper's gaze sharpened, and for a moment, an intensity passed between them that was almost palpable. But before she could interpret it, he broke eye contact, glancing out the window as if something had suddenly demanded his attention. There are things about my world, Miss Morgan, he said quietly, almost to himself, that are better left undisturbed. I trust you understand that, as a journalist. Lily felt her pulse quicken. This was more than she'd bargained for, more than an exposé or profile piece. There was something in his voice, an edge, a warning, that both thrilled and unsettled her. Perhaps, she said, choosing her words carefully, but the best stories are the ones that disturb something, aren't they? He smiled, the expression dark and knowing. Careful, Miss Morgan. Not all disturbances are worth the price they demand. The air between them thickened, a mix of tension and curiosity, and Lily felt her resolve harden. Whatever he was hiding, whatever he feared would be uncovered. She was ready to find it. Jasper glanced at his watch, breaking the silence. Our time's almost up, he said, his tone formal once more. Anything else you need for your profile? A dozen questions raced through her mind, but she forced herself to stay on track. Just one, she replied, leaning forward with a steady gaze. What do you value most, Mr. Blackwood? The question seemed to catch him off guard. For the first time, his composed mask slipped, and she caught a glimpse of something raw, vulnerable. Control, he said finally, his voice a bare whisper. Control is everything. With that, he stood, signaling the end of their meeting. Lily rose to her feet, feeling the weight of his last words settle around her like a warning. As she made her way out of the office, she realized that Jasper Blackwood was no ordinary man, and this was no ordinary story. She was more certain than ever that beneath the polished surface, There was something dangerous, something that might just be worth the risk. Lily's phone buzzed with an incoming text as she stepped out of her cab and into the bustling sidewalk. She glanced down to see a message from her editor, Ethan. Ethan, got anything? Need this story yesterday. Don't let Blackwood slip. She sighed, shoving her phone back into her bag as she looked up at the sleek glass tower looming above her. For all his words about keeping his world hidden, Jasper Blackwood certainly didn't mind reminding people of his wealth. Yet, beyond the facade of power and perfection, there were cracks, and she intended to pry them open. Pushing through the revolving doors, she made her way to the receptionist's desk. The woman behind the counter greeted her with a cool nod, and within minutes, Lily was escorted back up to his office. This time, however, she knew she wasn't here to play games. Jasper had summoned her, and her curiosity burned with questions. The same assistant from yesterday opened the office door, her demeanor as poised and professional as ever. "Mr. Blackwood will be with you shortly, Miss Morgan. Please, have a seat." The assistant left, and the silence in the office felt thick, charged. Lily paced near the massive window, taking in the panoramic view of New York's skyline, but her mind kept coming back to the man who held this empire in his hands. What was it he really wanted? The sound of footsteps made her turn. Jasper stood in the doorway, his face a mask of calm control, but his gaze held that same intense spark as the night before. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her, crossing the room. "Thank you for coming." She returned his cool look with one of her own. "You made it sound urgent." A slight smile curved at the corner of his lips, and he gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite his desk. "Straight to business, I see. I appreciate that." As she took a seat, Jasper leaned back, steepling his fingers as he studied her. "I believe you're looking for a story, one that could define your career, and I'd rather not have that story come at my expense." Lily's pulse quickened, but she held his gaze. "If there's no story to be found, then there's no reason for concern. Is there, Mr. Blackwood?" For a moment he remained silent, then chuckled softly, the sound both warm and cold. "Touché, but perhaps I can offer you something better. A compromise, if you will." "A compromise," she echoed, intrigued. This was not what she had expected. Jasper leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers with a sharpness that made her breath catch. "I propose a deal. I'll give you access to certain parts of my life, enough to satisfy your reader's curiosity. But you'll keep your investigation on a respectful level. No digging into pasts better left undisturbed." She raised an eyebrow, feeling her inner conflict sharpen. Part of her was thrilled at the access he was offering. The other part bristled at his attempt to set boundaries. "And in return, I give up pursuing what you don't want revealed?" "Precisely." His voice was low, almost a whisper, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm aware that curiosity drives your work, Miss Morgan, but I'm also aware that curiosity unchecked can be dangerous." There it was, that unspoken warning. She could feel it lingering in the air between them, a subtle but undeniable threat wrapped in charm. "What if I decline?" she asked, keeping her tone as casual as she could. "What if I decide the risk is worth the story?" His gaze darkened, and a flicker of something almost predatory crossed his face. "Then I'm afraid we won't have much to discuss, Miss Morgan. And believe me, closing doors is something I do well." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, and it fueled her resolve. She leaned forward, mirroring his posture. "Let's make one thing clear, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not in the habit of making deals that limit the truth." Jasper's expression softened, and he tilted his head as though studying her anew. "Then perhaps I misjudged you. Perhaps you are willing to walk away from a career-making story if it means protecting your integrity. Most people, Miss Morgan, would take whatever they could get." A beat of silence passed between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lily felt her pulse quicken as she weighed her options. She could feel the pull of ambition, the story waiting for her to grab it. But there was something else, something deeper, urging her to take a step back. "All right," she said finally. "I'll take the deal, but on one condition." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharp. "And that is? You let me see more than just the surface. If I'm to write about you, give the world a glimpse into Jasper Blackwood, I want to understand who you really are." She met his eyes, her voice firm. "No masks." For a moment he seemed taken aback, but then a slow smile spread across his face. "Bold, Miss Morgan, very bold." He inclined his head, conceding. "Fine. But remember, no one sees everything. Some things are simply not meant to be known. The words carried a quiet warning, and she could tell he meant them. But the thrill of the deal, the chance to get closer to him, outweighed her reservations. She'd walked a dangerous line before. This would be no different. "Deal," she said, offering her hand. Jasper's gaze lingered on her outstretched hand before he took it, his grip firm but warm. The touch sent a current through her, a reminder that this wasn't just a game or a transaction. This was personal, and more dangerous than anything she'd faced before. His smile turned almost playful as he released her hand. "Then we have an understanding, Miss Morgan. I look forward to seeing where your curiosity leads you." Later, as she left Blackwood Tower, the reality of what she'd agreed to settled in. She was in deeper than she'd planned, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Jasper knew it. Part of her felt exhilarated. This was the story she'd been waiting for, the one that could define her career. But there was another feeling, more elusive and unsettling. Jasper Blackwood was a man who thrived on control, a man with secrets that ran deep. And by accepting his offer, she'd willingly stepped into his world, where every move would be calculated, every word a step in a dance she wasn't sure she could lead. As she hailed a cab, she glanced back at the imposing tower, its glass facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. The city bustled around her, people rushing about with their own lives and secrets, blissfully unaware of the intricate web Jasper Blackwood wove from his perch above them. She couldn't shake the memory of his warning. No one sees everything. He'd spoken as though he'd lived with that truth for a long time, as though he'd learned the hard way that some parts of a person's life were best kept hidden. And yet, despite her instincts telling her to be cautious, she couldn't deny her fascination with him. The dangerous allure of his world, the thrill of the unknown. It was irresistible, like a drug she hadn't realized she was craving. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. Another message from Ethan, her editor. "Ethan, don't keep me waiting, Morgan. Let's see what Blackwood's hiding." She took a deep breath, fingers hovering over the keyboard as she typed out a quick reply. "Lily. Working on it. Just got him to agree to something big. Trust me, it's worth the wait." She hit send and leaned back, closing her eyes as the cab sped through the busy streets. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was an opportunity to uncover something few people ever would. And, she reminded herself, it was an opportunity to get closer to the man who haunted her thoughts with his cryptic words and unreadable gaze. Lily knew she was in for the ride of her life, and whatever the outcome, there was no going back now. 2 days later, a sleek black car pulled up outside Lily's apartment. She had been expecting it, though the sight of the driver, dressed in a crisp suit with an air of solemn professionalism, made her feel a thrill of excitement and nerves. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her with a polite nod as he held the door open. Lily slid into the leather seat, settling into the plush interior. The car glided into traffic, whisking her away from her familiar streets and into the unknown corners of Jasper's world. She knew little about where they were headed, only that Jasper had arranged to meet her at his private estate for a less formal introduction, as he had cryptically phrased it. As the cityscape melted into sprawling suburbs and finally into lush countryside, her anticipation grew. The drive was a reminder of how deeply Jasper had woven his empire into New York's bustling energy, yet also how far he stood from it, hidden away, untouchable. Finally, they turned down a long, winding driveway lined with tall, stately oaks. At the end of the drive, an impressive mansion rose from the land, its stone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Elegant, grand, and quietly imposing, the place looked like something out of an old-world fairy tale, and Lily couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. The driver opened her door, and she stepped out, taking in the pristine grounds around her. The scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers filled the air, a stark contrast to the city's metallic bite. "Miss Morgan," Jasper's voice called from the entrance. She turned to see him standing on the wide stone steps, dressed casually in a tailored shirt and dark jeans, looking every bit as comfortable here as he had in his high-rise office. In this setting, he was even more intimidating, his natural authority amplified by his surroundings. "Welcome," he said, his eyes meeting hers with that familiar intensity. "I thought it was time you saw where I call home." He offered her a faint smile, one that seemed almost warm, and it took her by surprise, momentarily disarming the instinctive defenses she always wore around him. "It's breathtaking," she replied, meaning it. I wouldn't have pictured you here, away from the chaos of the city. His smile grew, as if he found her comment amusing. Even the city's greatest advocates need a place to retreat. Come, let me show you around. She followed him into the house, stepping into a grand foyer with marble floors and high ceilings. Antique vases and paintings lined the walls, each piece speaking of a rich history. There was a kind of curated elegance in every corner, though not a single object seemed out of place or unnecessary. "Is this where you grew up?" she asked, marveling at the artwork that adorned the hallway. "Not quite," he replied, his voice carrying a note of nostalgia. "My family's home is elsewhere. This is my creation, a place built to my own specifications." His gaze lingered on a painting near the staircase, an intricate landscape scene. "But I suppose parts of my past are woven into it." The cryptic answer only fueled her curiosity, and she wondered what pieces of himself he'd hidden within these walls. As they moved through the house, Jasper continued to share small details, an anecdote about a statue he'd acquired during a trip to Europe, the story behind the towering bookshelves in his library. With each step, Lily felt herself drawn further into his world, an intimacy developing that she hadn't expected. Finally, they entered a sunlit room with glass doors that opened onto a patio. Outside, a sparkling pool glistened under the sky, its surface calm and clear, framed by manicured hedges and elegant lounge chairs. "Have a seat," he said, motioning to one of the plush sofas near the doors. "Can I get you something? Tea? Coffee?" "Coffee would be great, thank you," she replied, a bit thrown by his sudden hospitality. This wasn't the same guarded Jasper she'd met at the gala, or the one who'd challenged her in his office. Here he was, almost relaxed. He returned with 2 mugs of coffee, setting one down in front of her before taking the seat across from her. For a moment, they sipped in silence, and she took in the calm, the easy quiet of his home. "You seem different here," she said, finally breaking the silence. "It's like there's a part of you I'm only now meeting." He looked down at his coffee, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Perhaps you are." She hesitated, then leaned forward. "So, tell me, Jasper, why the secrecy? You have the means to be a public figure, to enjoy every perk that comes with your status. Why keep yourself hidden?" Jasper's eyes darkened, and the mask she'd seen before slipped back into place. "The world sees what I allow it to see, Miss Morgan. Sometimes that's the only way to maintain control. But there must be more to it than that," she pressed, unwilling to let him retreat behind his walls again. "Everyone has their reasons for building walls. I'm curious to know yours." He held her gaze for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. "My reasons are my own, Lily," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "They're the cost of the life I've built." Something in his voice stirred her, a reminder that this world of his came with a price she hadn't considered. Perhaps he wasn't just a billionaire with a fortress of secrets. Perhaps he was a man carrying burdens that she couldn't begin to understand. And yet, here he was, sharing a piece of this world with her. She felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Sympathy, maybe, or a recognition of the loneliness that seemed to lurk behind his confidence. Jasper set his mug down and rose, looking out over the pool. "But enough about me," he said, turning back to her with a small, almost teasing smile. "Tell me, Miss Morgan, what drives you?" She blinked, caught off guard by the sudden turn. "What drives me?" "Yes," he said, his voice soft. "You've spent days trying to pry into my life. I think it's only fair that I get to know a bit about yours." It was the first time anyone had turned the focus back on her, and for a moment she hesitated. She hadn't expected him to ask, hadn't expected him to be interested. "I suppose I just want to find the truth," she said finally, her voice quieter than she'd intended. "I've spent my career trying to uncover things that others want to keep hidden. There's something about finding the truth that's freeing." Jasper regarded her for a moment, his expression softening. "A noble pursuit," he said quietly, "but not always an easy one." "No," she admitted, a trace of sadness creeping into her voice. "But sometimes it feels worth it, even if it's painful." A silence settled between them, one filled with unspoken words and shared understanding. She looked out at the glistening pool, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. "Thank you for inviting me here," she said finally, breaking the quiet. "It's more than I expected." Jasper's lips quirked in a slight smile. "Consider it an opportunity, Miss Morgan. An opportunity to see things from a different perspective." His words lingered in her mind, and as he escorted her back to the car, she couldn't help but wonder what he truly meant. She had come here expecting to peel back the layers of Jasper Blackwood's life to uncover his secrets. But instead, she felt as if she had only glimpsed the edges of something much larger, something she might never fully understand. As the car pulled away, she glanced back at the mansion, a strange ache settling in her chest. For the first time, her role as a journalist felt complicated. She had a job to do, a story to uncover. But there was something about Jasper's world that had begun to pull her in, something that whispered of danger, of mysteries she hadn't even thought to question. The city lights blurred as they entered New York's streets again, and Lily found herself lost in thought, wondering if she was ready to face the cost of chasing after Jasper Blackwood's truth. The next time they met, it was at a secluded, upscale restaurant in the heart of Manhattan. Lily had only received Jasper's cryptic message an hour earlier. "Dinner. I'll send a car. Black tie." She barely had time to pick out a dress, choosing a sleek black gown that felt both elegant and daring, much like the man who'd invited her. As she stepped into the restaurant, the air heavy with the scent of rich spices and fine wine, she caught sight of Jasper waiting by the window. He was impeccable, dressed in a tailored black suit, his gaze focused on her the moment she walked in. There was something in his eyes, an intensity that made her feel as though she were the only person in the world. "Lily," he greeted her, his voice a low murmur. He took her hand, brushing his lips over her knuckles in a gesture both old-fashioned and intimate, sending a thrill through her. "Jasper," she replied, smiling as she took the seat he offered. The table was draped in white linen, set with candles that cast a warm glow. Soft music played in the background, and she felt the world around them fade as he settled into his seat across from her. "A night off from the questions, Miss Morgan?" he asked, a hint of mischief in his eyes. She raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "You're the one who invited me, Mr. Blackwood. Should I assume this is an attempt to distract me from my work?" His mouth curved into a smile, and he poured her a glass of deep red wine. "Consider it a chance to see another side of me." They talked over dinner, the conversation drifting from favorite cities to childhood memories, each story revealing small pieces of themselves they hadn't shared before. Jasper's voice softened when he mentioned his family's estate in Europe, a place he hadn't visited in years. Lily noticed the way his gaze grew distant, the flicker of longing that crossed his face before he quickly masked it. "You've lived so many lives," she said, almost in awe. "Do you ever feel isolated?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and for a moment, Jasper's face grew serious. He set down his glass, his fingers brushing against hers. "Sometimes," he admitted quietly, "but isolation is often the price of control, of keeping things hidden." Her heart quickened at his honesty, and she found herself leaning in, compelled by a desire to know more. "You don't have to keep everything hidden," she said softly. His eyes held hers, a flicker of something deep and conflicted passing through them. And then, as if making a decision, he reached out, covering her hand with his. The warmth of his touch spread through her, and her pulse quickened as his thumb brushed gently over her fingers. "I'm not sure I know any other way," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. But his touch lingered, and in that moment, words seemed unnecessary. The waiter arrived with dessert, a delicate arrangement of chocolate and berries that neither of them touched. Their focus had shifted, the unspoken tension between them thickening as the minutes ticked by. Finally, Jasper rose, extending his hand to her. "Walk with me?" She took his hand, allowing him to lead her through the quiet streets outside. They strolled in silence for a while, the city lights twinkling above them, each step bringing her closer to the man who had been, until now, just an enigma. They stopped by a small park, the city sounds muted here, the air cooler. Jasper turned to face her, his hand still holding hers, his gaze piercing. "You're unlike anyone I've met, Lily," he said, his voice hushed, as if sharing a confession. A surge of warmth bloomed in her chest, and she felt herself lean closer. "Likewise," she whispered, almost breathless. They were so close now, and in that moment, she could feel the air between them crackle with anticipation. His hand moved to her cheek, his thumb grazing her skin as he studied her face, his gaze intense and unreadable. Then, slowly, he leaned down, his lips brushing softly against hers. tentative at first, as if testing the waters. But the gentle touch quickly deepened, his arms sliding around her waist, pulling her closer. Lily felt herself melt into the kiss, her senses alive with the warmth of his touch, the taste of wine on his lips, the feel of his hand at the small of her back. She hadn't realized how much she'd wanted this until now. All the questions, the intrigue, they faded as she let herself get lost in the sensation, in the undeniable chemistry that had been building between them from the moment they'd met. When they finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. "Lily," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not used to this." She smiled, brushing her fingers along his jaw. "Neither am I." He chuckled softly, a sound that sent a thrill through her, and he pulled her close again, his arms wrapping around her as if he didn't want to let go. In that embrace, she felt a vulnerability in him, a glimpse of the man behind the carefully crafted mask. But then, almost as quickly as it had appeared, the vulnerable expression vanished, replaced by the calm, controlled Jasper she'd come to know. "I should get you home," he said, his voice gentle but distant, as if he were trying to pull back from the moment. "It's late." Reluctantly, she nodded, though her heart ached with the sudden loss of connection. They walked back to the waiting car in silence, their hands brushing but not quite touching. It felt as if a line had been crossed, yet something in him was already retreating, as though he regretted the intimacy they'd shared. As the car pulled away, he settled into the seat beside her, his expression unreadable once again. The warmth of his touch lingered on her skin, and she glanced at him, trying to decipher the thoughts hidden behind those dark eyes. Finally, as they approached her apartment, he turned to her, his gaze softer than before. "Thank you for tonight, Lily," he said, his voice almost tender. She offered a small smile, though a part of her wanted to say more, to ask if tonight had meant as much to him as it had to her. But the words caught in her throat, and instead she nodded, slipping out of the car with a quiet, "Good night, Jasper." As she entered her apartment, the silence settled around her, and she realized how profoundly tonight had affected her. She'd come seeking answers, seeking a story, and now she found herself caught in something she hadn't expected, a connection that felt as dangerous as it was thrilling. She knew she was in over her head, but part of her didn't care. Whatever it was that drew her to Jasper Blackwood was powerful, undeniable, and as she replayed their kiss in her mind, a part of her knew she'd crossed a line she could never return from. Back in the newsroom, the hum of voices and tapping keyboards filled the air, but Lily felt disconnected from it all. Her mind replayed the events of the previous night. Jasper's touch, his closeness, the way he had looked at her with a vulnerability she hadn't expected. She could still feel the warmth of his hand, the press of his lips on hers. But beneath the thrill lay a nagging feeling of guilt and doubt. She was a journalist, and he was her subject, a man she was supposed to be investigating, not falling for. As much as she tried to ignore it, the line between personal and professional had begun to blur, and the truth left her feeling exposed. Ethan's voice snapped her back to the present, his usual gruff tone hinting at impatience. "Morgan, you've been working this story for weeks. What have you got?" Lily glanced up, scrambling to refocus. "I'm close," she replied, forcing a confident smile. "Blackwood's guard is up, but I'm getting through to him." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Good, because if you don't break something soon, someone else will." The unspoken pressure in his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She knew what this story meant, not just for her career, but for her reputation. But she couldn't shake the memory of Jasper's guarded expression, the way he seemed to have walls built so high that even he couldn't see over them. After Ethan walked off, she pulled out her notebook, flipping through pages of notes and observations. Jasper's secrecy nagged at her, but something else had started to eat away at her curiosity, something she hadn't admitted to herself before. It wasn't just about the story. She wanted to know him, to understand what had turned him into the man he was today. Unable to resist, she opened her laptop and typed Jasper Blackwood history into the search bar. She had read his public biography 100 times by now, but this time, she scrolled past the articles and into forums, old archives, anything that might offer a glimpse beneath the surface. And that's when she found it. A small article in an obscure finance magazine dated almost a decade back, detailing the near collapse of a small family business in the UK, the Blackwood estate. There was a passing mention of Jasper as a young man, stepping in to save the family's legacy in a ruthless business move that had shocked many. But the details were scant, carefully crafted to portray him as a hero rather than a mercenary. Intrigued, she kept digging, clicking through links until she stumbled upon an even older article, one with far darker implications. The piece hinted at a scandal involving the Blackwood family, one that had been buried over the years. There were vague accusations, insinuations about financial wrongdoing, and talk of family feuds. Jasper's name appeared here and there, always in connection with his role in covering up the mess, protecting the family name. Her heartbeat quickened as the pieces began to fall into place. Jasper wasn't just a wealthy CEO with a knack for business. He was a man who had built his empire out of necessity, out of a fierce loyalty to protect something or someone. And yet, the more she read, the more she realized how deeply his family's secrets ran. Lily leaned back, absorbing what she had found. This was the truth she'd been chasing, a glimpse into the darkness that Jasper kept hidden beneath his polished exterior. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like betrayal. Later that night, she sat in her apartment, staring at the scattered notes on her table, the dim light casting shadows over the pages filled with Jasper's life in fragments. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd crossed a line, that she'd dug into something too personal, too raw. The kiss they had shared lingered in her memory, a bittersweet reminder of the connection she'd felt, and now the doubts that followed. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw his name. Jasper. Dinner tomorrow night? My place. No work talk, just you and me. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keys. Part of her wanted to turn him down, to say no and draw the line before things spiraled further. But the other part, the one that craved to know him, to understand the man behind the mystery, won. Lily. I'll be there. As she hit send, a mix of excitement and dread filled her. She had uncovered secrets that could ruin him, secrets that most people would never dare to dig up. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to walk away, even knowing the risk. The following evening, she found herself once again in the black car, the city lights streaming past as she was whisked to Jasper's estate. The air felt charged with tension, an energy she couldn't quite place. When she arrived, he was waiting for her by the door, dressed in casual attire, his smile welcoming but his eyes reflecting a depth she couldn't ignore. They moved through his house, the elegant rooms and grand halls feeling familiar now, as if she belonged there. He led her to a cozy dining room overlooking the gardens, where candles flickered on the table, casting a warm glow. Dinner was quiet at first, their conversation drifting over safe topics, the best restaurants in the city, the places they had traveled to. But as the night went on, Jasper grew quieter, his gaze more contemplative, as though something weighed on his mind. Finally, he set down his glass, meeting her eyes with an intensity that took her breath away. Lily, I know you're here to uncover something, he said softly. You wouldn't have come otherwise. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. There was no point in pretending, not now. Yes, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I came here for a story, but somewhere along the way, I found more. A flicker of pain crossed his face, and he nodded, as if he had been expecting it. And what did you find? Her heart pounded, the weight of her discovery pressing on her. She felt an urge to tell him everything she'd uncovered, to share the pieces of his past that she had pieced together. But as she looked into his eyes, the words caught in her throat. I found a man who hides as much as he reveals, she said, her voice trembling. A man with shadows I don't fully understand. He studied her, his expression unreadable. And does that make you want to run, or does it make you want to stay? The question hung between them, and Lily felt herself pulled in two directions, toward the truth and toward him. She knew she couldn't have both, that every step forward was a step into a future she couldn't predict. Instead of answering, she reached across the table, her hand brushing his fingers wrapped around hers, warm and steady, grounding her in the moment. She didn't know if this was a choice she'd regret, but in his touch, she found a certainty she hadn't felt in a long time. He rose from the table, pulling her gently to her feet, his gaze soft and unguarded. They stood there in the flickering candlelight, the silence between them speaking louder than words. Lily, he murmured, his hand resting on her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. I don't know what this is, or where it's going, But for tonight, can we just be? She nodded, her heart in her throat, and let herself be drawn into his embrace. His lips found hers, tender and searching, and she lost herself in the warmth, in the feeling of being held by a man who was as haunted as she was. They moved through the house together, their steps quiet, leading to a place where their secrets no longer mattered. In his arms, she forgot the story, the chase for the truth, the weight of what lay between them. For the first time, she let herself fall, knowing that whatever happened next, this night would be theirs alone. The morning light streamed through Lily's window as she stared at her phone, its screen still blank. Jasper hadn't called or texted since she'd left his estate the previous night. She knew she should feel relieved. She'd crossed into dangerous territory, and distance was what she needed. But her heart twisted with something that felt dangerously close to regret. As she settled into her desk at the newsroom, she couldn't shake the memory of his touch, his words, the way he had looked at her, unguarded and vulnerable. And yet, that vulnerability only deepened her conflict. She had uncovered secrets he'd kept hidden for years, secrets that held the power to shatter the life he had built. She pulled up the article she'd saved on her laptop, rereading the lines that hinted at corruption, manipulation, and scandal. His name was embedded in every paragraph, a young man stepping into a whirlwind of deception, a pawn in a family's legacy of betrayal. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, her mind torn between her loyalty to the story and her loyalty to him. Still no update? Ethan's voice cut through her thoughts as he leaned over her desk, his brow furrowed with impatience. Come on, Lily. You're holding the story of the decade, and you're dragging your feet. Lily felt her cheeks flush. I just need more time, she replied, trying to mask her hesitation. There's a lot at stake here. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Don't tell me you're going soft on Blackwood. He's not the kind of guy you want to get cozy with. Trust me. Her stomach twisted at the words, but she managed a curt nod. I know what I'm doing. Good, he said, giving her a long, hard look. Because if you don't, someone else will run this story. We need an exclusive, not a romance novel. As he walked away, Lily's resolve hardened. She knew she couldn't avoid Jasper forever. She needed to face him, to confront him with the truth, and finally put an end to the chaos swirling between them. In that evening, she found herself standing outside his estate once again, her heart pounding as she waited for him to answer the door. She'd tried to prepare herself for this moment, to steel her emotions and stay focused. But the moment the door opened and she saw him standing there, her heart betrayed her. Lily. Jasper's expression was a mix of surprise and something else, something guarded, wary. We need to talk, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He stepped aside, motioning for her to come in, and she followed him through the halls, the silence between them heavy. They stopped in the dimly lit study, where he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to her before taking a seat. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I know about your family, she began, her voice low but firm. About the scandals, the corruption. I found articles, documents, things that paint a very different picture of you than the one you've let me see. His face darkened, his jaw tightening as he took a slow sip of his drink. I told you some things were better left undisturbed. And I told you I needed to know the truth, she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. You asked me to trust you, Jasper. But how can I do that when you've kept so much hidden? He sighed, setting down his glass. Do you think I wanted this life, Lily? Do you think I chose to carry the weight of my family's sins? His voice was bitter, raw with emotion she'd never heard from him before. Every decision I've made has been to protect what little good there was left, to build something from the ashes. Her heart ached at the pain in his voice, but she forced herself to push forward. But you never let me in, she said, her voice breaking. You kept me at arm's length, feeding me only pieces, keeping control while I fell deeper into this, whatever this is between us. He rose to his feet, pacing the room, his expression torn. Because I knew this would happen, he said, his tone fierce. I knew that if you got too close, you'd uncover things I can't change. Things that I've tried to protect myself and my family from for years. And you think I haven't protected myself? She countered, her voice rising with frustration. I'm a journalist, Jasper. I've spent my entire career digging up truths that people would rather keep hidden. But you're the one person I wanted to trust. His gaze softened, the anger in his eyes melting into something more vulnerable. "Then why did you come here tonight, Lily? If you wanted the truth, you already have it. What else are you looking for?" The question struck her, cutting through her defenses and leaving her bare. She wasn't sure she knew the answer herself, but standing here, facing him, she realized she couldn't walk away. "I came because I needed to know if any of it was real," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If what we had was more than just whatever this is." For a long moment, he said nothing, and then with a look of resignation, he took a step closer, his hand reaching for hers. "Lily," he said softly, his voice raw with an honesty she'd never heard from him before. "This has been real from the moment I first saw you. Every word, every touch, every kiss. But my world, what I've built, it's not something I can just open to anyone. It's dangerous, and I wanted to keep you safe from it." She felt the tears prick at the corners of her eyes, the weight of his confession breaking down her resolve. "I don't need protection, Jasper. I need the truth. All of it." He closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging as he took a shuddering breath. "Then you should know that I've done things I'm not proud of. I've hurt people, made decisions that were ruthless and unforgiving, all in the name of protecting my family. And if you choose to stay, if you want this to be more than a story, you'll have to accept that part of me." Lily's mind spun, torn between the love she felt and the darkness he carried. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the man behind the mask, the man who had built his world out of necessity, out of loyalty to a family that had both scarred and shaped him. She took a step closer, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines of tension etched into his skin. "I don't know what's going to happen, Jasper. I don't know if this can work, but I know that I'm willing to try." His eyes softened, and he leaned into her touch, a flicker of hope lighting up his face. "Lily," their lips met in a slow, tender kiss, the kind that held the weight of everything they had fought against, everything they had tried to deny. And as they held each other, the world around them faded, leaving only the two of them, bound by a truth that was as painful as it was undeniable. For the first time, Jasper let his guard down completely, allowing her to see the man he truly was. And Lily knew, in that moment, that whatever happened next, they would face it together. No more secrets, no more masks. The world outside Jasper's estate faded into the background as Lily and Jasper held each other, the weight of their confessions lingering in the quiet space between them. She could still feel the warmth of his touch, the honesty in his eyes, a rarity that had pierced through every defense she'd built. In that moment, it was only them, stripped of pretense and facade. He took her hand, guiding her down a long hallway lined with art and photographs, mementos of a life he'd lived so guardedly. As they passed a grand portrait of a young Jasper standing beside a stately woman, his mother, she assumed, Lily caught a glimpse of the complexities that had shaped him. They entered a room at the end of the hall, a private sitting area with a fireplace casting a warm glow over the space. He pulled her close, their breaths mingling as they stood together in the dim light. His fingers brushed her cheek, and she felt herself lean into his touch, craving the warmth, the safety he offered in the midst of the chaos they had created. "Lily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to stay. I would understand if this is too much." She looked up at him, her heart racing with an intensity she hadn't expected. "I'm not going anywhere, Jasper." Her words hung between them, and he leaned down, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was both gentle and hungry, as if he were finally allowing himself to feel everything he had tried so hard to bury. His hands moved to her waist, drawing her closer, and she felt herself surrender to him, letting go of the questions, the doubts, the lines she had sworn never to cross. Together, they made their way to the bedroom, the firelight casting shadows on the walls as they left their fears behind. In that room, every wall crumbled, every guarded piece of themselves laid bare. She found herself lost in him, in the quiet strength of his embrace, the way he held her as though she were the only real thing in his world. Hours passed in a blur of whispered words and tender touches, and when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Lily felt a quiet peace settle over her. She nestled against him, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. This is more than I expected," she murmured, her voice soft in the darkness. He wrapped an arm around her, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her shoulder. "You're more than I ever expected, Lily," he replied, his tone vulnerable, as if the admission cost him a piece of his carefully guarded pride. She smiled, her fingers brushing against his jaw, feeling the strength in him even in his most unguarded moments. I didn't think I could feel this way." He pulled her closer, his lips pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Neither did I," he whispered, his voice a mix of relief and tenderness. They lay together in silence, the world outside a distant memory. For once, she didn't care about the story, the byline, or the ambition that had driven her here. All that mattered was the man beside her, the one who had opened his world to her despite the risks, the secrets, the consequences. But as dawn approached, a faint hint of reality crept into her mind, stirring a sense of dread she had tried to ignore. Their relationship was fragile, built on truths that had been hard-won, and promises that might be hard to keep. She knew that the world outside wouldn't understand, that it would demand explanations, answers, questions that neither of them could afford to face. Jasper sensed her unease, his hand reaching for hers as he turned to face her. "You're worried," he murmured, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. She sighed, looking into his eyes, searching for the reassurance she needed. "It's just the reality of this," she said quietly. "We're in a bubble here, but out there." He nodded, his expression somber. "I know, but I don't regret any of it, Lily. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." His words steadied her, and she realized that despite the uncertainty, she was willing to take the risk. She'd crossed the line, and there was no going back now. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, casting a warm glow over the room, she leaned up and kissed him, a silent promise in the gesture. Whatever the cost, she would stand by him, just as he had opened himself to her. The day ahead loomed with challenges they could only begin to anticipate. But for now, in the quiet of the morning, they had each other, and that was enough. The newsroom felt colder than usual as Lily walked in, clutching her coffee like it was a lifeline. The glow from her night with Jasper still lingered, but now, in the harsh light of reality, that glow felt fragile. With every step, her heartbeat echoed in her ears, a reminder that this wasn't just a romance, but a tangled web of ambition, secrecy, and the looming threat of exposure. Ethan's voice cut through the office chatter, loud and clear. "Morgan, my office now." Lily swallowed, squaring her shoulders before making her way toward him. She'd been avoiding this confrontation, hoping she could find a way to tell him about her relationship with Jasper without destroying her credibility. But one look at Ethan's face told her he wasn't in the mood for explanations. He didn't wait for her to sit before he started. "You're stalling," he accused, slamming a folder down on his desk. 2 months, Lily. 2 months you've been working on this Blackwood story, and you're telling me you've got nothing?" Her stomach twisted, but she kept her face neutral. "I'm close," she replied, forcing herself to stay calm. "I just need a little more time." Ethan's eyes narrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Time isn't something we have, Lily. The board's breathing down my neck, and now I'm hearing rumors that you're involved with him?" Her pulse quickened. "Where did you hear that?" "Doesn't matter where I heard it. I want the truth," he said, his gaze piercing. "Are you involved with Jasper Blackwood?" Lily hesitated, the silence heavy between them. Her career, her relationship, her entire life hung on this moment. But she couldn't bring herself to lie. "Yes," she whispered, barely able to meet his eyes. "But it doesn't change the story, Ethan. If anything, it's made me more determined to uncover the truth." Ethan's face hardened, his disappointment palpable. "You're kidding yourself, Lily. You've lost your objectivity. This isn't just a story anymore, it's a scandal waiting to happen. And if you're not willing to bring it to light, I'll find someone who will." The words felt like a slap, and she took a shaky breath, trying to regain her composure. "Ethan, please, give me a little more time. I just need to do this the right way." But he shook his head, his expression cold. "The right way? You crossed that line the moment you got involved with him. You've compromised everything, and now it's your mess to clean up. I'm giving you one last chance. Either you bring me that story by the end of the week, or you're off it. And don't think I won't go public with what I know." The ultimatum hit her like a punch to the gut. She knew what this meant. If she didn't publish the story, someone else would. And with Ethan determined to expose their relationship, Jasper's reputation would be dragged through the mud, all because of her. She nodded numbly, her mind reeling. "Understood," she said, barely managing to keep her voice steady. Ethan dismissed her with a wave, already turning his attention to something else. She left his office in a daze, the enormity of her situation sinking in. She had to make a choice: her career or Jasper. That evening, Lily stood outside Jasper's estate, her heart heavy with dread. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of facing him, of explaining the impossible situation she was in, felt like a betrayal. They had only just started to build something real, and now it was about to be ripped apart. He greeted her at the door, his usual guarded expression softening when he saw her face. "Lily, what's wrong?" She took a shaky breath, stepping inside as he closed the door behind her. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He led her into his study, concern etched across his face as he poured them both a glass of wine. "Tell me," he said, his gaze fixed on her. She gripped the glass, searching for the right words. "Ethan found out about us. He's demanding the story by the end of the week, or he'll go public. He's threatening to destroy my career. And yours." Jasper's expression darkened, his gaze sharpening as he processed her words. "So that's why you're here," he said, his tone laced with bitterness. "You're choosing between me and the story." Her heart broke at the accusation, but she couldn't deny the truth of it. "I don't want to lose you, Jasper. But if I don't write this story, someone else will. They'll twist it, turn it into something it's not, and you'll be the one who pays the price." He turned away, his jaw clenched as he stared out the window. "And what about the price I've already paid, Lily? The years I spent building this life? The sacrifices I made to protect what mattered? I know, and I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I never meant for it to get this far." Jasper's shoulders sagged, and he let out a heavy sigh. "This is why I keep people out, Lily. Why I've built walls so high no one can climb them. Because I knew, the moment I let you in, this would happen." She reached for him, her hand brushing his arm. "It doesn't have to be this way, Jasper. We can find a way to make this work." But he shook his head, his gaze distant. "You don't understand. This isn't just about us. If my secrets come out, there are people who will be hurt. People I promised to protect." She looked down, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so long chasing the truth, but now, faced with the cost, she wasn't sure she could bear it. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jasper reached out, his hand cupping her face, his thumb brushing away the tear that had slipped down her cheek. "Then maybe we were doomed from the start." The words shattered her, the finality in his tone a knife to her heart. She knew he was right, that their relationship had been a fragile, impossible thing, caught between ambition and love. They stood there in silence, both knowing that this was the end. She took a shaky breath, trying to memorize the feel of his touch, the warmth of his hand, the way he looked at her, as though she were the only thing that mattered. "Goodbye, Jasper," she whispered, stepping back, her heart breaking with every step. He didn't stop her, his expression unreadable as she walked out of his life, leaving behind the man she had come to love and the truth she had fought so hard to uncover. The days after she left Jasper passed in a blur, each one emptier than the last. Lily threw herself into work, trying to fill the void he had left, but the ache only grew stronger. Every headline, every article she read felt hollow, as though something essential had slipped away from her. Her unfinished article on Jasper Blackwood remained in her drafts, untouched since that last night together. She knew she could finish it, turn it into the exclusive story of the year, but every time she opened the file, her hands would tremble, and she would close it again, the words vanishing from her mind. A week later, Ethan called her into his office. "You're stalling again, Morgan," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "If you don't file the story, I'll run it myself. I have enough on Blackwood to go public, with or without your take." Lily took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "Then run it without me, Ethan," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm done." Ethan blinked, clearly taken aback. "You're walking away from the biggest story of your career?" "Yes." Her voice grew stronger, surer. "I can't write it. Not like this. There's more to Jasper than just a scandal. And if you want to print half-truths, you'll have to find someone else." He scowled, but she didn't flinch, meeting his gaze with a determination she hadn't felt in days. She could see the disbelief in his eyes, The shock that she was willing to sacrifice everything for a man who, by all accounts, was nothing more than a story. But he wasn't just a story to her. He was Jasper, the man who had let her into his world, shown her pieces of himself that no one else had ever seen. "You're making a mistake," Ethan spat, his face twisted with disdain. "You'll regret this." She shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "I already regret what I almost did to him." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the newsroom, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and relief. For the first time in her career, she had chosen her heart over her ambition, and as terrifying as it was, it felt like a release, a weight lifted from her shoulders. The following evening, Lily sat alone in her apartment, staring at the dark cityscape through her window. She couldn't help but wonder where Jasper was, if he thought of her, if he understood why she had made this choice. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She picked it up, her breath catching when she saw the message. "Jasper, I heard you walked away from the story." A surge of hope rose within her, and she quickly replied, "Lily, I couldn't do it. Not like that." There was a pause, and her heart raced as she waited for his response. "Jasper, meet me? My place. One last time." Her hands trembled, and she took a deep breath before typing a single word. "Lily." "Yes." When she arrived at his estate, the air between them was thick with the unspoken words they had left hanging. He opened the door, his face unreadable, though a flicker of relief crossed his features when he saw her. They stood in silence for a moment before Jasper spoke, his voice soft. "Why did you do it, Lily? Why give up everything?" She met his gaze, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his eyes. "Because I love you," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "And I couldn't destroy you to save my career. Not after everything we've been through." For the first time, she saw the weight of his own guilt, the pain he had carried for so long. He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek, his touch sending a shiver through her. "You should have chosen the story," he murmured, though there was no conviction in his voice. "I don't deserve this." "But you do," she insisted, taking his hand in hers. "You've spent your life running, hiding from the world. You let me in, Jasper, and that's all I needed to see." He looked down, a small, broken laugh escaping him. "You're an impossible woman, Lily Morgan." She smiled, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "And you're a difficult man, Jasper Blackwood." They stood there, their gazes locked, and in that moment, everything else fell away. The pain, the mistakes, the secrets. All that remained was the love that had pulled them together, the connection that had survived the trials they'd faced. Jasper pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as though afraid to let her go. She felt his heartbeat against hers, steady and strong, and she knew, in that moment, that this was where she belonged. "Stay," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Stay with me, Lily. Let's leave the past behind us." She looked up at him, her hand resting on his cheek, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Yes," she replied, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "I'm not going anywhere." They held each other, the weight of their past lifting as they embraced their future together. For the first time, they could see a life unburdened by secrets and fear, a life built on trust and love. Several months later, Lily sat in a cozy cafe, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands as she read the latest article she had published. It wasn't about Jasper. It was a piece about resilience, about the strength it took to rebuild, to find love in the aftermath of struggle. She'd chosen a new path, one that allowed her to tell stories that inspired, rather than expose. As she looked up, she saw Jasper walking through the door, his familiar, easy smile lighting up the room as he approached her. He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, and she felt that familiar warmth bloom inside her. They didn't need words to understand what they'd found together. A love built not on perfection, but on redemption and trust. And as they sat together, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city, Lily knew that, against all odds, they had found something worth fighting for. A future that was theirs to create, one day at a time. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription will show that I'm on the right path to bring you the best videos ever. Check this video out too. She's a billionaire heiress who just lost $20 million to a mysterious hacker. Furious, she tracks him down, but he's not just stealing her money, He's out to destroy her entire legacy.